Just a real quick, my name is Andrew Connell. You got my contact information there. SharePoint or an Office Apps and Services MVP, which is funny. That kind of means that they've classified me as an IT pro. Anybody that knows me knows that that is way off base, and I'm more of a developer. And then some other information that you can see there about me. Before we get started, though, I do want to have one special call out. I know we all have this joke here about how, you want to get in touch with Vesa or you want to get something done. The joke is to send him an email that just starting with Dear Vesa. I can tell you that from this past weekend, it actually works because I went to a IndyCar race over the weekend and I printed out something that said Dear Vesa, and I got one of the drivers to hold it up. This is Takuma Sato. Guess who got position 1 for the pole position in qualifying and won the race? So Takuma Sato is a fan of Vesa. All right, let's back off the slides and let's actually see some real stuff here. So what I want to cover is what I want to cover today is talking a little bit about working with the SharePoint framework and with Microsoft Teams. And so you would use the SharePoint framework to customize or to extend Teams by creating custom tabs. Now I've already got something that is already created here, and I'm going to show it to you that's already working. We're not going to go through the process of building it up and deploying it. But I want to call out a couple things about this. First, there's a little bit of an issue with how things look right now. If you might have seen some of the docs, or if you have tried different things you've seen in the UI, I want to make sure that you're aware of the fact that some things are not fully deployed everywhere. So I want to show you the other option, the other way of dealing with it. Then I also want to show you one of the benefits to working with the SharePoint framework and using the SharePoint framework as your extensibility option when it comes to working with Microsoft Teams. The big benefit that I would see there, or one of the big benefits here, is that when you're building custom tabs with just the Microsoft Teams SDK and the way that the Teams team has really been pushing extensibility for a while, if you want to leverage things in, say, the Microsoft Graph or in a Azure AD secured service, it can always be a little bit of trouble to get this working. Anyway, one of the nice things about working with the SharePoint framework, then, as I was talking about earlier, is that instead of having to go do a bunch of extra work to try and connect to Microsoft Graph or to Azure AD secured services, when you use the SharePoint framework when you're extending Microsoft Teams, you get to leverage all of the stuff that the SharePoint framework has right inside of it out of the box, and that includes some of the support we have for the Microsoft Graph. So in this project we have here, what I've done is I've got two special things in here. One of them is going to show the different context between the working inside SharePoint and working inside Teams. But then I'm also going to show you how we can leverage the Microsoft Graph in both solutions. Now, all I did was I just created a brand new project using the 1.8 version of the SharePoint framework. So you can see all these 1.8 references. And then inside the manifest file for my project, all I did was come in and add in this extra bit that you see that I have highlighted here, which says, for the supported hosts, this can run both inside SharePoint as a SharePoint web part. So that was already there. And then the part that I have highlighted is I added in Teams tab. So what this is telling Microsoft, or telling Office 365, is that this customization can be loaded as a custom tab inside of a Microsoft Teams team. So I added this little reference in here, and then inside my code, I went in and I just went ahead and coded up my web part. Now, the only thing that's kind of interesting about this guy is that if I come up here, let's come to the top here, you can see right here where I've added in a reference to the Microsoft Teams JavaScript SDK. Now, a little bit farther down, inside my web part itself, I have a private member that I defined called Teams Context, as well as I've overloaded the onInit method. And all I'm doing in the onInit method is I'm checking to see, is the Microsoft Teams object present on the context? And if it is, what that is saying is that we are in Microsoft Teams. And so I then try to go get the context from Microsoft Teams and assign it to that private member that you see above, and then resolve the promise. Otherwise, I'm going to be inside SharePoint, and so I just go ahead and resolve the promise, which leaves this private member that I've defined as undefined. So let's scroll down a little bit farther and let's look inside this render method. What are we doing? So all I'm doing inside a render is I've created two different variables here. I've got a title property and a current location property, and all they're doing is checking to see, am I currently in a Teams context? And if I am, then let's say that we're in a Teams context, and let's say what the name of the team is that I'm in. Let's go ahead and write that out to this string. Otherwise, we'll say we're in SharePoint and the name of the SharePoint site collection that we're in. So then what I do is inside my render method, to show us which one we're in, I'm going to say, here's the title. So it's either going to say, welcome to Teams or welcome to SharePoint. And then it's going to say, welcome to, or currently in the context of the following current location. So I'm either in the context of a SharePoint site collection with the name of the site collection, or in the context of a Microsoft team. Now, one of the other things that I've done that's kind of interesting here is you see that I'm using the Microsoft Graph support that we have inside the SharePoint framework. So I haven't had to do anything special to get this working, just the standard old Microsoft Graph support that we've done, which just involves two things. One is leveraging the Microsoft Graph inside of my component. And then the other thing is leveraging the granting a permission or a scope to my tenant. We'll see that in just a minute. But you can see here that I'm getting a reference to the client, to the Microsoft Graph. I'm then going to the endpoint to see my information or my profile information. And when I get that back, I'm going to have a user object that comes back, and I'm just going to write out some information about me. So you can see what my display name is and my mail is. And of course, you could do all kinds of stuff with the Microsoft Graph, but in this case, I just wanted to show that, hey, look how easy it is. It's just like working with the SharePoint framework. Now, what do we end up doing? We then build this up, we package it, we bundle it, and we package it, and I've got my SPFx Teams SPPKG file that's been generated. So I went over here to my apps for SharePoint, over to my app catalog for my tenant, and I uploaded this solution right here, and everything's good to go. Now, when I did this, I specified that this was tenant deployed. Now, this is just an easy way to do it. Maybe this is what you want in your environment. Maybe you don't. It's up to you. But I just went with the easy approach. So when I created the project, it said, do you want to, enable feature deployment? And what I did is I said, skip feature deployment is set to true, which basically is saying, yes, you can deploy this web part to automatically have it installed to all site collections throughout your tenant. So that's going to make it easy. It's going to let any Microsoft team inside of my tenant have access to use this. And the reason why is because every Microsoft team, the backing of it is a SharePoint site collection. And so if this is already installed into all the site collections, including the ones that are the backing to a Microsoft team, then that means when I want to install this, it's still going to run on that team. Now we'll see, I'll show a little bit more of the details of how this works when we actually get to the Teams part in just a minute. Now, once I uploaded that, this is the part where I want to give you a little bit of a caveat and give you a little bit of a heads up on how things are going to work. If I select this item and I go over here to the Files ribbon, or the Files tab in the ribbon, you'll see this button here that says Sync to Teams. Now, this kind of works today, kind of doesn't work. What this will do is if I had set inside of the manifest for my web part, if I had set that this was available as a Teams tag, then this button is enabled. Otherwise, it was going to be disabled. If I click this, what it would do is it would use the information from my from my SharePoint project, and it would dynamically generate the manifest file needed for a Microsoft Teams team or Microsoft Teams app package to be able to define this custom application. And then it would generate the zip file that contained the two images, which you see by default inside of a SharePoint framework project now when you use 1.8. So you get these two pictures. It'll dynamically generate the manifest. It'll create a zip file containing the two images and the manifest file it generated, and it will automatically deploy that to your Microsoft Teams tenant catalog or the store. Now, that's the way it's going to work eventually. Today, I've been working with Microsoft off and on over the last week or so, and we've identified that it doesn't always work like that right now. So my 2 cents is don't use this Sync to Teams feature right now because it's not terribly reliable. It will be. Even if you click it, you'll get this little message over here that will say successfully synchronize to Teams, and that's great, but then you go to Teams and it's not there. So I'll show you another way to do it in just a minute. But before we do that, let's take a look and see this web part actually running. So I have a SharePoint site collection running inside of this tenant. And I've already added this web part to a page so we can see this web part running. So if I go over here to my pages, I've got a page called test bed. So I'm going to jump to my test bed. Go take a little nap. Nope, not yet. Rendered too fast, so I can't do that just yet. And if I scroll down, we can see that we're in SharePoint. The current context is I'm inside of a site collection named vdemos01. This is just some text from my web part, and then check out that this is the details from the Microsoft Graph. So I can see that I'm logged in using a demo tenant that I have called the MO, and the username is MOD Administrator, and then that's the actual account I'm logged in as. Okay, that's all great, fine and good. That's SharePoint. But what about Microsoft Teams? So I'm going to come over here to Teams, go teams.microsoft.com, and it's going to nag me, say, don't you want to use the client? And I'm going to say, no, I want to use the browser. Oh, of course, it doesn't ask me that this time. Now it's going to go straight to the browser. Fantastic. Okay, sweet. So that's good. And, I've already got it added. So let's go ahead and let's create a new team now. So this is going to be not my first team. I'm going to create a brand new team called my second team. It's not really true. I've created a lot. And check it out. You've got somebody that looks a lot like, well, I won't say it. All right, we're going to skip. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to want to go add in my web part. Now, here's the part that that gets a little screwy here. Now, I've already deployed this, so I'm going to see the experience that I would expect, which is I would come over here to say I want to add a tab. So I clicked on that plus, and if I scroll somewhere in here, I should see my custom tab that I've defined. Now, here's the part that's interesting. In the future, when that sync to tabs button is actually operational, this is what you would see. We'd be all in good shape. But today, it is, like I said, it's a little temperamental. And so what I did, and what I would recommend you do, at least until you see us update the docs for this, is that inside of my SharePoint, inside of my project here, my SharePoint Framework project, I've created a app manifest for the Microsoft Teams team, or the Microsoft Teams app manifest. I've created this myself. And if you go look at the documentation on the SharePoint Framework site, there's a sample that you can pull down, and the link that I'll post in just a minute to the training module that Vesa mentioned earlier and that Mikhail mentioned earlier. There's a lab that actually walks you through and gives you a reference to this file. But effectively, all you have to do is create this file, copy paste the one that you got in that was provided to you. There are a lot of little placeholders of things that you can go replace, like the name of the project and the description, as well as the icons. The important part here is that make sure that the pictures, the icons here, map the pictures that are inside of the Teams folder. So you see here this GUID that you see. That GUID is actually the GUID from, where's my source? From the web part itself. So notice here, there's the ID that ends in 8A3D. So if you grab this GUID, what I did is I went over to my manifest and I simply just made sure that that was the ID right here. As you see, that's the link to those two images. And let me go word wrap here. You will find another place where there'll be a component ID and it's referencing a GUID as well. So if you look at the lab that we have in there, it actually has some placeholders of things you can do a find and replace on these different strings, and it'll replace these three different options. Now, once you do that, you're going to take these three files. You're then going to zip them up, right? Don't zip up the folder. Just select these three files, and you would like right-click inside of Windows Explorer and Finder if you're on a Mac to zip them up into a file called whatever you want .zip. All right. If I come back over here to the browser, I wouldn't see my tab showing up the very first time. So what I could do is come over here to My Apps, and if I scroll down to the bottom here, you'll see Upload a Custom App, where you could then choose, do I want to upload it just for me, or do I want it just for my teams, or for my entire tenant? I could select this and then pick the zip file that we just generated. Now, I've already done that, so I don't have to worry about this. But once you do that, you'll then see all your own little apps show up like I have here that are showing up and available for use. So that then the next time you go into one of your teams, like my second team, and I click on the little plus, and if I scroll down, I should find this tab here. So remember, That manual process is called side loading, and there's some other stuff that you may end up having to do with your tenant if you haven't set it up. Again, if you refer to the documentation that we have, it walks you through everything you need to do. The documentation is up on the SharePoint documentation site, specifically SharePoint Framework Docs. And I'll grab links to those at the very end here if somebody else hasn't done that already by the time we switch back to the presentation. But so you have what?
Yeah, so this means, Andrew, so if we follow you on Twitter, you'll probably say Yahoo or something when the automatic sync is in place, so we don't have to do this manual process, right?
If you follow myself or Vesta, you will probably hear us say not that or something like, finally. So one of the two. We both thought it was working last week, and we started playing with it, and it's like, it looks like it's working, but it's not working. So there's just some weird kind of stuff going on that Microsoft's engineering is trying to track down and figure out what's going on. So it's think of that feature as in dev preview. That's me saying that. It's not Microsoft, but think of it as being in dev preview right now. So I don't think it's reliable. I wouldn't rely on it for now. But yeah, it's coming soon. So you either one of two ways. Either this process that I just showed you is called side loading. Eventually, you won't have to do that, and eventually you will be able to just use the sync to Teams, and ta-da, it'll work. The other nice thing, though, is that if you want to override the values of the manifest.json that Microsoft is generating dynamically, you can still use that same process I showed you of creating the manifest file. And when you click sync to Teams, SharePoint Online, when you click sync to Teams, it will see that you have a manifest file and say, oh, I'm going to use the one that you created, not dynamically create one so you have more control over it. So, all right, we're in good shape. So how we go ahead and add a tab? So I'm going to go hit plus. Let's scroll down. I'll pick this guy. Pops up, says you want to add it to a team. Yes, I do. I'm in the team, so it's not going to prompt me for that. I'm going to say install. The experience is going to be a little bit different than when you do a normal Microsoft. Why isn't it doing it? Install it, please. There we go. So the experience is a little bit different because I have some customization configuration options that I want to define on this specific web part, but it would normally be shown here. But because it's SharePoint, instead it's going to show it to me more the SharePoint style. So when the tab loads, you're going to see the property pane on the right-hand side open up with these two settings that I have defined here. And I'll go ahead and close this out and check it out. It's the same web part. Well, hold on. It's loading it. There we go. It's the same web part. So there we go. Now we're running in the context of Microsoft Teams. It knows the team that we're currently in, and I'm getting the same information from the Microsoft Graph because I'm already logged in using my same account. Everything just works. Now, one other cool thing that is neat about this is that notice here that my settings button is gone from this tab that you see here. And the reason why the settings button is gone is because in the code, if I look at the manifest file right here in the manifest file, I said can update configuration is equal to false. If I had, by setting this to false, you saw the configuration open up the first time when I added the web part or when I added the tab to the team. That's going to be the behavior you always see. You're always going to see that when you install a new tab or add a tab, you're always going to see the configuration tab pop up. And what that's doing is it's giving people who have permission to add tabs to a team, it's giving them the ability to customize it. But by setting this value to false, that's blocking users from being able to modify those configuration settings after the fact, after I've installed it in a team. So if I had set this to true, then when I come back over here to the browser, this would have said the settings link would have shown up here as a third option here. And then clicking on that would have opened up the property pane. But this is just giving us a way about, the experience in Teams is a little bit different from the experience in SharePoint, where in SharePoint you can put the entire page in edit mode, and you have to have permissions to be able to do that. In Teams, there's no put it in edit mode kind of context, and so instead you either have permissions to do something or not, and so that settings link is going to show up or not. This is how Microsoft chose to deal with it, and so that's really all I had to show. I mean, it's really straightforward and really easy. If you want to see how to do this, if you go to, and again, Vesta said that he would be updating that SPF aka.ms/SPFx-training link. He will have that updated with, you'll see a bunch of social sharing stuff that goes out shortly. But for the meantime, if you just go to GitHub, here's the way I go to it. If you go to SharePoint or github.com/SharePoint, And then on the repositories list, if you do a search for training and scroll right today, if you scroll to the bottom, right here to this Teams Dev, if you go to this is what's going to be linked from that page that Vesa has, and you'll find things like about a screencast, walking through stuff. There's an entire lab manual. If you go to the lab manual and you want to see that one thing that I referenced earlier, where it walks you through, and it says all the stuff. Here we go. So here's one little thing. You may notice this is the part that we just added as a call out to say, heads up that this sync to Teams thing doesn't exactly work today. And then here's the part where you can go grab this manifest file that has all these different things, these replacement strings that you can go replace and what you're looking for in the component file. So like, for example, in this lab, that's where you'll find it. So it's made it as simple as we could possibly make it for you to go through and update this and to see this working. The demo that I just showed you is the exact same thing that's inside of this lab, except I added in this stuff for Microsoft Teams, for the graph stuff that you see here with the user mail. That information is also inside of another training thing that we have, another training module that Vesa is linked to, that he's already got listed up on that, the aka.ms SPFx training. And that's here inside this third-party APIs module where there's a lab on working with the Microsoft Graph. I just copied some of the code from that module to make it work.
Right, so Andrew, you've been playing with this for, I know, for the last week or a couple of weeks. So are there any special things you really need to pay attention to when you start doing stuff, either to have it hosted both in Teams and SharePoint besides the manifest part, or are there any weird stuff you need to look at for the graph stuff to work?
No, I mean, the nice thing about it's a great question, Mikhail. The nice thing about this is that it just feels like SharePoint Framework. I mean, I'm just still doing SharePoint Framework stuff. I haven't spent much time doing customizations to Microsoft Teams until the SharePoint Framework added this capability, or I guess the Teams team added this capability, or one of the two. And I was pleasantly surprised about how just natural it felt or seamless it felt from working with the SharePoint Framework. There was really nothing special I had to do. I mean, the only part that I guess I have a flat spot on my forehead from banging it on the table trying to figure it out was the whole sync to Teams thing, where I saw the button which to me said, hey, this works now, and everything looked like it worked except nothing was showing up inside of my Teams store. So right now it's just the side loading bit that you have to do. So if that was frustrating me and confusing me, I worked with Vesa last week and we got the docs updated to make it very clear to do the side loading approach and to ignore that sync to Teams button for now. So everything is pretty much there, and it just makes a whole lot of it's really simple, really straightforward.
Yeah. Cool. Actually, Mikael, if one point which I really want to kind of reinforce, and AC said it really well, but one of the things what we really wanted to make easy for SPFx and now through SPFx also for Teams, it is really the graph API approvals and hitting third-party APIs and everything else. Because otherwise, if we wouldn't have that admin UIs and if we wouldn't be able to define the needed permissions in the SPPKG file, you would actually need to call somebody who owns the Azure installation, create the application there, grant the permissions, everything else. Now, all of that is taken care of. Also for Teams customizations, you don't need to worry about where your stuff is being hosted. Everything is automatic. You just write your stuff using SharePoint Framework, and we'll deal with the governance, we'll deal with operations, we'll deal with permissions and hosting and deployment. And that's what was the big thing for us when we were working together with Teams people, which they saw as a huge benefit in SPFx, because this way enterprise developers don't need to worry about where the stuff is getting hosted. It is just hosted automatically in SharePoint Online, even though it is visible in the context of Microsoft Teams.
So more or less we have made auto-hosted great again in Teams.
Kind of. Mikael, calling auto-hosted add-ins in these meetings is always terrifying because not that many people remember that anymore, but hey.
Well, they can Google it.
Oh, by the way, and AC, thank you for the Dear Vesa images. Those were awesome. I'll flip back on the slides so Mikael can close up and we can have a discussion still in IM window.